Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to cut through the noise and get to the core insights on complex issues.
That's right. And today, well, if you follow the news even a little, you can't miss the really intense debates happening around American governance.
Exactly. It feels like more than just policy squabbles. The very way we govern seems up for grabs sometimes.
It really does. You see these deep divides, problems that just seem stuck, intractable.
Which is why today we're diving deep into some of those friction points. We'll be looking at the U.S. border, foreign policy decisions, and these bigger questions about government's role and structure.
And we've got a good range of sources to help us unpack it all. Things like academic work, border games, for instance, but also congressional records, news reports, a real mix.
Our goal here is to pull out the key arguments, the facts that jump out, especially highlighting some prominent conservative perspectives within these debates. We want to help you get a handle on what's important, see the different sides, and, make up your own mind without getting lost in the spin.
Okay, so let's start where so much attention is focused right now, the U.S. Mexico border. What's really striking is that a heavily enforced border isn't exactly new.
Right. It feels like it escalated recently, but the groundwork was laid earlier.
Way earlier. Sources like Border Games show this sharp, steady escalation in enforcement starting back in the early 1990s. Federal funding for border and immigration control just ballooned.
Ballooned how much?
Well, think about this. It went from about $1.5 billion annually to $19.5 billion, a huge jump.
Wow, okay. That's a massive increase in spending. And what did that look like on the ground, physically?
It meant, hundreds of miles of actual barriers, metal walls, that sort of thing, plus lots of high-tech gear, military-grade surveillance.
And personnel, too.
Oh, absolutely. The Border Patrol itself, it's more than 5 times bigger than it was in the early 90s, went from around 4,000 agents to over 21,000. It's just a completely different scale of operation down there.
That really sets the scene. Then, fast forward, and Donald Trump enters the picture. His promise to build a big, beautiful wall that was central to his campaign, wasn't it?
It absolutely was. Hugely popular on the campaign trail, tied right into his Make America Great Again message. But sources point out that while it fired up his base, it became really divisive once he was in office.
How's that?
It sort of walled him in politically. He really took ownership of the border issue in a way that broke what had been, maybe surprisingly, a kind of quiet bipartisan agreement that border security was important.
So that consensus fractured.
Fundamentally broken, yeah. And that turned border security into the hyper-partisan issue we see today.
Which brings us to the current situation. And the conservative viewpoint, as we see in our sources, is, well, it's pretty blunt.
It is. Republicans, including former President Trump, they talk about open border policies under the Biden administration, creating an unmitigated disaster zone. Trump specifically said Biden turned it into the single worst border crisis in U.S. history. Strong words.
And they point to numbers to back that up, right? What figures are they citing?
They are. From sources like the Congressional Record, they highlight figures like over 8.3 million illegal crossings nationwide under Biden. Compare that to 1.6 million in Trump's first 3 years. That's a massive, 519% increase they're pointing to?
And it's not just the overall number, is it? There are specific categories they emphasize.
Yes, exactly. They point to the increase in encounters with people on the terror watch list jumping from 8 under Trump's period to 361 under Biden. And something getting a lot of attention is the number of Chinese nationals encountered, many described as military-aged men. That went from around 450 to over 24,000.
So for them, these aren't just abstract stats. They see them as reflecting a real evolving challenge.
A profound challenge, yeah. They argue these numbers show a situation changing the whole debate around immigration and security in ways we haven't seen before. They argue these policies effectively allow, quote, dangerous gangs and cartels, human traffickers, and deadly drugs like fentanyl to pull into our communities.
And they mention gotaways, too.
Right. They highlight a figure of record-setting 860,000 gotaways in just 2023. And the description they use is stark. Nearly 1 million potential felons, cartel members, terrorists, and drug traffickers freely allowed into our country.
There's an economic argument tied to this as well.
Definitely. They talk about an annual net burden to the American taxpayer exceeding $150 billion. And you hear specific examples like Texas Governor Abbott saying his state alone has spent $12 billion doing what they believe is the federal government's job.
So, boiling it down, their position is clear. Secure the border first. Everything else, like broader immigration reform, has to wait.
That's the stance. Border security and border protection first. Immigration reform can come later.
And this feeds directly into that whole impeachment effort against Homeland Security Secretary Mayorkas. What was the core justification from House Republicans?
They charged him with willful and systemic refusal to comply with the law and breach of public trust. The argument was basically that he failed in his duty to, quote, control and guard the boundaries and borders. They saw his actions or inactions as deliberately ignoring the law.
Making impeachment the only option left, in their view.
That's what they argued, yeah. That Congress had no other viable option when they felt the courts couldn't provide relief for what they saw as him not doing his job according to the law.
But that wasn't a universally held view, even among Republicans?
No, definitely not. You had Democrats defending Mayorkas, saying he's a good man trying to do his job, but Republicans won't give him the resources. But also, importantly, constitutional law experts, and even some Republicans like Representative Tom McClintock, pushed back hard.
Say it was political, not legal.
Exactly. Calling it a baseless political stunt based on policy disagreements, not actual high crimes and misdemeanors. They pointed out the framers specifically rejected maladministration, just, bad management, as grounds for impeachment.
And Mayorkas had his own defense, citing enforcement numbers.
Right. He countered by pointing to his department removing record numbers of migrants and seizing record amounts of fentanyl. So yeah, a deeply contested issue reflecting fundamentally different views on what warrants impeachment.
Okay, so these deep divisions are clearly shaping border policy and accountability questions.
Yeah.
But they don't stop at the border, do they? They spill over into foreign policy, too.
Absolutely. They're completely intertwined. Just look at the standoff over aid to Ukraine.
That's a perfect example. House Republicans basically linked Ukraine aid directly to border security reforms here at home.
They did. They refused to consider aid unless it included border measures. And you saw Donald Trump's influence really clearly there. He declared the Senate's bipartisan border deal a bad deal, apparently, before even seeing the details.
And that effectively killed it in the Senate.
Pretty much. Many Senate Republicans, some called Trumpublicans, fell in line and refused to vote for it. Then House Speaker Johnson called it dead on arrival, and the House wouldn't vote on the Senate's bill that passed later without the border stuff.
And the worry there, for many observers, is that this kind of delay emboldens aggressors like Russia.
That's the major concern voiced, yes. That it makes the U.S. look unreliable and potentially makes the world less safe. It raises big questions about alliances and collective security moving forward.
Meanwhile, aid for Israel moved on a different track, at least initially in the House.
Right. The House moved quickly after the October 7th Hamas attacks, passing a standalone $14.3 billion package just for Israel's defense.
And the argument from conservatives was
that this clean bill was simply the right thing to do. They framed it as essential for Israel to defeat the terrorists and also for protecting U.S. personnel. There was a strong line. Those who want to annihilate Israel wish to do the same to America. A clear moral and strategic case from their perspective.
But that standalone approach drew criticism.
It did. Democrats called it a political stunt. They argued it actually made it less likely Israel would get funded quickly, especially since President Biden threatened to veto a bill that only included Israel aid and left out Ukraine and other priorities. Plus, concerns were raised about the lack of humanitarian aid for civilians in Gaza in some of these proposals.
It highlights the different priorities and approaches. Now, what about NATO? Donald Trump's comments on NATO spending have certainly stirred things up.
Oh, definitely. His statement about potentially encouraging Russia to do whatever the hell they want to NATO allies who weren't spending enough on defense that caused a major reaction.
How do his supporters explain that kind of rhetoric?
They frame it less as abandoning allies and more as a tough negotiation, a way to leverage allies to force them to increase their NATO spending by demanding they pay up. It's a challenge to the traditional Republican view of projecting American power, suggesting a more transactional approach. You pay your share, or maybe the guarantee isn't absolute.
The potentially big shift in foreign policy thinking. And shifting gears slightly, but still on the global stage, there's an interesting economic trend our sources picked up.
Yeah, this is quite significant. In 2023, for the first time in 2 decades, the U.S. actually imported more goods from Mexico than from China.
20 years. What's behind that shift?
It's being called reshoring or nearshoring. Basically, companies are moving their supply chains closer to home. It's driven by ongoing trade tensions between the U.S. and China, plus the risks highlighted by things like Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Businesses are looking for more stability, closer partners.
So a quiet but pretty major restructuring of global trade is underway.
It seems so. It's an economic reorientation happening right under our noses.
Okay, so we've touched on border policy, foreign relations, but underlying all this are fundamental questions about how the U.S. government itself should operate. Which brings us to Project 2025. What exactly is this?
Project 2025, overseen by the Heritage Foundation, is, well, it's massive. It's a detailed plan for a potential next Republican president to completely overhaul the executive branch.
More than just ideas, right? It's practical.
Very practical. We're talking over 900 pages of specific policy proposals, a database of potential personnel vetted to carry out this agenda, training programs for them, even a 180-day action plan ready to go on day one. It's designed for rapid, sweeping change.
And what are some of the specific proposals attracting the most attention?
Well, there are quite a few. Things like reversing the FDA's approval of the abortion pill mifepristone, putting stricter rules back in place, aiming to significantly downsize NOAA, the agency dealing with weather and oceans, which the project labels one of the main drivers of the climate change alarm industry.
Okay, what else?
It also calls for getting rid of diversity, equity, and inclusion DEI programs across all federal agencies, and rolling back policies from ICE, the Immigration Enforcement Agency, that currently discourage enforcement actions at sensitive places like schools or churches. These are just a few examples, but they indicate pretty fundamental shifts.
And how is this project being received politically?
Predictably, it's very polarized. Donald Trump himself has tried to distance himself from it publicly. He said something like, "I know nothing about Project 2025. I disagree with some of the things they're saying," calling some proposals ridiculous and abysmal.
But Democrats are still linking him to it.
Oh, absolutely. They see it as his potential playbook. President Biden claimed Project 2025 will destroy America and said it should scare every single American. So yeah, it's become a real focal point in the debate about the country's future direction.
This whole discussion about executive power connects to another legal debate happening right now, doesn't it? The one about Chevron deference.
It does, yeah. Chevron deference is this long-standing legal idea that courts should generally defer to federal agencies when it comes to interpreting laws that aren't crystal clear. Basically, give the experts in the agency the benefit of the doubt on how to implement the law Congress wrote.
But that's being challenged.
It is. Critics, often aligning with conservative viewpoints, argue that this gives agencies too much power, effectively letting the administrative state make law, which they see as infringing on the power of Congress and the judiciary, a violation of the separation of powers.
So the Supreme Court is looking at this.
Yes, there are cases before the Supreme Court right now that could significantly limit or even overturn Chevron deference. That would be a huge change, potentially reducing the regulatory power of federal agencies across the board.
So bringing this all together, we've covered a lot of ground, from the very real situation at the border to how the U.S. engages with the world to these fundamental questions about how much power the executive branch should have.
And what really comes through is how interconnected these things are. The debates aren't happening in isolation. They reflect deep ideological disagreements and very different strategic calculations about America's future.
Understanding these different viewpoints, the arguments being made, the facts being cited by each side, it's really crucial, isn't it? Especially when there's so much information, so much noise out there. You need to be able to see the core issues.
Absolutely. We've seen how political strategies on, say, the border can directly impact something seemingly separate, like aid to Ukraine. It all ties together.
It really boils down to fundamental questions. Who gets to govern? How should they govern? What should the priorities be? It's this ongoing negotiation of power, values, and how we define America's interests, both at home and abroad.
A negotiation that seems particularly intense right now.
So as you listen to all this, as these debates keep shaping the country's path, what really stands out to you? How do you see these policy disagreements playing out in Washington? I mean, more importantly, what questions does this raise for you about that balance, the balance between security and liberty, or the role of government in a world that's constantly changing?